listening to the Deep Purple Podcast, a fan podcast about one of the most legendary bands of all time, Deep Purple. We take a look at the music, history, and people behind the band Deep Purple and beyond. All right, welcome to the Deep Purple Podcast. This is bonus episode number 18, where John and I are going to interview the one and only Paul Mann.
Yes, very excited about this one.
Yes, Paul's conducted the 1999 Concerto Tour, a million other things, a bunch of works with John. So we're John Lord, not John Mottola.
Not me.
He hasn't conducted any of your works yet.
It's conducted like me forgetting things, number 36. Yeah.
So yeah, we're fortunate enough to have him on the show. So here we go. Let's get into our interview with Paul Mann. So Paul Mann, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Yes, thank you so much. So where are you in the world right now?
I'm in Latvia, in a town on the coast of Latvia called Liepāja, where we have recorded quite a lot over the last sort of 10 years or so. And so we'll be making a CD this week. And I just have a day off here and then moving on tomorrow.
You were kind enough to spend your day off, or at least a little bit of the day off with us. So thank you.
Very happy to do that.
So it's a bit later there. So you're probably just gearing up for dinner in a little bit.
It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon here.
Okay. Excellent. We're just waking up. So
Yeah. I'm sorry it's so early. We have a long, this part of Europe, we're further away than the UK.
Oh no, we're not waking up early, but we're waking up.
On rock and roll.
So so we're in the midst now of covering the 1999 Concerto.
Yeah.
And remember when it happened and kick ourselves for not being there.
You weren't there. It's a long time.
Unfortunately not.
Long way.
It's one of those things you didn't realize at the time how easy it would have been to probably make it happen, even though it's in a different country, but
yeah,
seemed difficult at the time, and we were probably just too busy working or something.
It's a long way. It was a long way. And at that time, I think there was no idea that we would try to do it anywhere else.
So did you not know before that show that it would turn into a tour?
No, I remember it was after the second show when we were all having a drink and we were all sort of, full of the the excitement of it all. I don't remember who the first person to say, wouldn't it be great to tour this was. I don't think it was Bruce Payne. I don't think it was anyone whose responsibility it would have been to actually put that together. It would have been a terrifying idea to take an orchestra, either to take an orchestra all over the world or to do it with different ones. Either way. So I think, it was really just a case of, wow, wouldn't that be great? But nobody really thought it would happen. And then gradually, I think they started to get so many offers and so much interest that they started to look at whether it could happen. But I think at the time, it was only ever intended to be just those. It was one show. And then when the first one sold out so fast, we did a second one. And I think at that stage, that was going to be it.
That's great because I'm sure you opened the second show so more people could see it, but so many people I talked to were just at both shows.
Yeah. Well, looking back at I've still got some of the, the posters and stuff. I think the tickets was it 25 quid or something ridiculous like that? Looking at all this stuff's happening with Oasis in the last few days, it makes you realize it really was another era. But yeah, it was, I don't think it was very expensive.
No, another reason I'm kicking myself for not going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Financially, not a problem.
Yeah.
So for our listeners, can you tell a little bit about your background with how did you start in music? Where did you get started? What's your earliest memories?
Well, it's not a memory I can remember, except, you sometimes when you're told things, that becomes the memory. But apparently on my first birthday, my great grandfather, who I didn't know, he died when I was still very young, apparently picked me up and he sat me at the piano and he put my fingers on the keyboard and I kind of lit up with excitement and started bashing it and every chance I got to go near it, I would try to play it. And I think that by the time I was about 5, I think my parents started to think, well, maybe we ought to, get some lessons and see if, see if we can teach him how to do it properly, and so I think that's pretty much how it started. And I think by the time I was 6 years old, I think it would be 71, Colin had already left South Shields, our hometown up in the northeast of England, to start work with Purple. And I mean, all the way through my childhood, he was a sort of a shady background figure that, I hardly knew. I knew I had this uncle who, was a long way away doing this, what we thought was a tremendously glamorous job, And then little by little, sometimes he came back at Christmas, sometimes not, but we saw him occasionally. And then, and I started to get a little bit older and I used to be able to go to the, not Purple shows, but Rainbow shows at that time, so talking about 77, 78, so there was that side of my musical life going kind of developing, and the other sort of classical side where I was just beginning to do what all musically interested people do, and to learn an instrument and to sort of develop the two things at once. So when it came around to trying to bring the two of them together, it seemed a natural thing for me to do.
So, Paul, how did you get into being interested in music? How did you get interested into conducting in particular?
Well, that I can't remember about music. Music, I can't remember not being able to read music. I can't remember not being able to, or at least wanting to play music. That was always there. I think conducting thing came much later. I mean, I was well into my time at university before I started to feel, and it would be a bit strange, to want to conduct without first knowing a bit about wanting to play an instrument and getting to know that side of music first. But I think it sort of came gradually, and I was quite lucky, I think, because conducting is one of those things that you can't practice on your own. You need a bunch of people to to do it with, and getting those people when you're young and inexperienced is quite difficult, because no one's going to give you a chance unless you can prove that you've already done it and with some success before. So I was lucky and I got chances as a student and built it up that way. And so by the time the Deep Purple thing came along, I was already conducting. I had a position with the London Symphony Orchestra, and I'd been making a sort of start on a career. Because I think the story is, and I'm sure Ian won't mind me telling you this, what I was subsequently told is on the bus when they were talking about who could we get to conduct this, and Colin said, "Well, my nephew's a conductor." And Ian Gillan is supposed to have said, "Oh, Colin, I think we need someone a bit better than members of your family, And subsequently, of course, he was very happy to disown those remarks. But you can understand why he thought that. Why would we want this kid just because he's your nephew? And it was when they found out, that I'd already had some kind of pedigree. That I think they were a bit more reassured. But that's yeah, it's so it was all connected really with with the background with Colin, and how much of a part that music had played in my life all through the development of what I was doing musically, even as much as any classical composer, that was all part of it.
So they're getting ready. They're going with you because you have some conducting experience, and did you have uh did you have any recording experience like, well, obviously you've done a bunch of conducting, but
By
did you have recording experience?
by 1999, yeah, I'd done a couple of CDs with the London Symphony Orchestra.
Okay.
And I had done quite a bit of studio recording with the BBC. Quite a lot of young conductors tend to get cut their teeth doing these kind of studio recordings, where you go in and do stuff that gets broadcast on Radio 3, which is what we call Radio 3, which is the classical station in on British radio. And so I'd done a bit of that, but I think what swung it really was that was John. I mean, what happened was that I got a phone call. I suppose it must have been around the beginning of 1999, from Colin to say, "Can I give John your phone number?" As if I was going to say, "No, don't." And so he gave John my number, and John called me. And the message was initially the message from Colin was, we think we found the concerto. And of course, then my first thought was, oh, it must have turned up finally after all these years, we'd spent looking for it. But it wasn't that, it was this whole other story, which everybody knows about now, that this amazing kid, not a kid, I mean, a young composer in the Netherlands had spent, years reconstructing a score from listening to the recording. And so John came, at that time because I was working with the LSO, I was renting a flat in Notting Hill, and he came into London, and we just spent hours going through this score and talking about music, and it was as if we had known each other all our lives. I mean, we had met a couple of times before, but not really very seriously. And that was the beginning of, I think he came away from that meeting feeling, oh yeah, I think this is the right person for us. And so I was very lucky that we hit it off the way we did. And of course, that was the beginning of a really, really important friendship for me, in all sorts of ways.
So you were a fan of Deep Purple. You obviously growing up, and
Yeah.
with your uncle, you were exposed to them. But so what was it like having grown up with this music and been a fan of it and being thrust into this?
I've told the story before that Colin used to come back with records. He'd give my grandparents copies of albums and stuff and whatever was coming out. And maybe I wasn't the only person whose grandparents had lots of Deep Purple albums in their record collections, among all the Ray Conniff albums and stuff like this, James Last albums and stuff like that. But they did, and they had all this stuff, and actually they did listen to it. And one of the things they had was the concerto, and I think that was must have been one of the first things I ever heard, or ever actually took the record out of his sleeve and put it on the thing and listened to it. And I think it fascinated me even from a very early age. And I used to pretend conduct it, stand in front of the mirror or whatever, and and fantasize about conducting it. I'm talking about being, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 years old, that sort of thing. And yeah, so it was always there. And and then I think I would have been 12 or 13 when I was first taken to a Rainbow concert. And I was put on a flight case behind the keyboard player, who was David Stone at that point. And then, of course, a year or so later was Don. And Colin had persuaded Don to let me play the keyboards in the sound check. And there are photographs somewhere of a rather anxious looking Don standing there while I'm playing this priceless CS80, or whatever it was that he had, lots of these beautiful analog, classic keyboards. And so it was a really, head turning experience that for me at that age. I would have been about 14 or 15. And I think Don could see it as well. I remember him saying, yeah, but not one of these keyboards is as good as a grand piano. Don't forget that. I think he didn't want to be responsible for turning my head into wanting to be a, rock and roll keyboard player. But I certainly would have, I would have loved to. I don't have the talent for that, but I would have loved to do it all the same. It was an intoxicating thing for a kid to be shown that world, and to be shown inside that world at such an impressionable age.
And here you're playing in a giant stadium like that. That's got to be pretty incredible.
Well, it wasn't a giant stadium. It was Newcastle City Hall, but
Okay.
it might as well have been a giant stadium as far as I was concerned. I remember it. I remember it really vividly, and it was and the experience of the first Rainbow show that I saw, the Dio one. You remember how that show started with the the little snippet from Over the Rain, for the Judy Garland thing from the film, and then this crashing, thudding, heart-stopping kind of sound is something that lived with me for so long, and I can still remember it really, really vividly. There's nothing, I had heard nothing to compare with that, and it was, as I say, it was a really important musical kind of baptism of fire, And Ritchie saw me playing Don's keyboards, and he came over and jokingly said to Don, what's your job? And he said, if you ever need a job, you just come talk to me, Of course, he was joking. At least I think he was joking, but I never did anyway. And so of course it was, it was an amazing, amazing thing, and it was all, because of Colin. He had taken this giant leap of faith, leaving. He had a very safe job in the local town hall, and I think he decided I didn't want to spend the rest of his life doing that, and and it's classic, stuff. You just leave and go, and and he made such a success of it. And my grandparents, who had sort of said, don't come back to us when you run out of money, that kind of thing, were very, very proud of him, of course.
Oh, that's great. It's great that it worked out so well. And obviously he's extremely highly regarded in the Deep Purple community, and for everything that he's done over the years.
Yeah.
So
I loved all that.
Yeah, it's got to be.
I loved seeing that. Incidentally, I loved seeing that when I worked with the band for that period. I loved seeing the affection that the fans had for him, and that the way he was, also the way he was thought of by the band. Because of course I didn't know any of this. This had all been happening worlds away as far as I was concerned. And suddenly, it was really great to see how well thought of he was by everyone.
I don't have a lot to gauge it by, but it does seem really special to me, because I can't imagine that there's many other bands where the fans are as in touch with who the people behind the scenes are, and treat them like extensions of the band.
Yeah, I soon got to know quite a lot of them, and I'm still in touch with quite a lot of them on Facebook and things like this. There's a sort of hardcore of people who are very close to the center of the fan community, over many years, and people that I met who very much with their hearts in the right place, and that I'm still in touch with, after all these years. It's a big family, really, and some great people.
So one of the things John mentioned early on in one of our first episodes, I think we talked about the concerto, and that was a really big moment for us. We had gotten a VHS copy of a copy of a copy at some convention somewhere, and watched it as teenagers, and just had our minds blown by how this could have even taken place. And one of the things that John really mentioned that maybe he could speak to is how different it was from other things like that. Like if you see Metallica playing with an orchestra, not to say anything negative about Metallica, but it might just be the orchestra playing along to one of their songs, but about how this was something that was uniquely written to be performed in this way.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes it special. And having someone like you, who isn't just a hired gun, but someone who's actually a fan of the music, I think is what
Yeah, it was
kept it in life.
it was a wonderful kind of coming together of things and it came together very quickly. I mean, it was not planned years in advance, it all seemed to just fall into place. But yeah, I think it's quite unusual for a rock musician to have the kind of musical literacy, the kind of musical technique that John had. I think he was completely. I mean, I've met some of these other people who are also extremely well versed musically. There are plenty of, especially rock and roll keyboard players. They often tend to be the ones in the band that have a classical training of some kind. But I don't think there are many who could have written the way John did, to have composed and orchestrated and completely created this work from nothing. I think some people still kind of assume that maybe he wrote bits of it and then gave it to someone else to orchestrate or to fill out in some way. It's really not the case. Every note of it is composed and orchestrated by John. And I've spent a lot of time in the last 25 years telling people that, Malcolm Arnold, great as he was, and as a great composer, he was a very important figure, but he didn't have any hand in creating the concerto. That was all John's work. And I think that's,
Wow.
that's the first unique achievement of it. And I think the way that, I mean, I've done the concerto quite a bit since John left us. And as you know, I've been doing it recently with Bruce Dickinson and a few other players, really good players. And although it's going very well and it's very nice to keep on doing it, I do miss John because John had a way with talking to the band, kind of translating the language of classical music for the benefit of the band and translating it back to me, and we sort of understood one another extremely well through the way that John, made it all happen. So that was something special, and certainly one of my best memories of the preparation for the Albert Hall concerts, the original ones, was the rehearsal period, because that was really my privilege to sit and watch Deep Purple rehearse, watch them work, see how they communicated with each other and how they understood one another, and the way, the efficiency and the swiftness of the way they understood one another and spoke to one another. I think that was fantastic, and all I had to do was to just absorb it and tap into it and try to make my little contribution to it. So it was it was something special.
Yeah, I think what Nate just mentioned, he was kind of speaking about conversations we had when we first did the concertos, how we were blown away that a rock band could be doing this,
Yeah.
which kind of like for us it lent like a legitimacy to our band, like wow, they're doing a full-on orchestral thing. It's not just the orchestra playing with the band songs.
Yeah.
And that John Lord wrote this concerto by himself and so quickly. Just listening to this after so many years, how do you feel that he, as a composer, he's known most as a rock keyboard player, but obviously he's a really accomplished composer. How do you feel that he compares to some other, I guess, better known or more revered composers, like in the genre?
In the genre where these two things have been combined, you mean?
I would say in the genre of being a classical composer, because I would say like most of the most of the concerto is not it is concerto for group and orchestra. Most of it was the orchestra, which I found really impressive just
Yeah.
when I first heard it, and every time since I've heard it.
Well, I think John at that age, I mean, what was he, 28 when he wrote the concerto? You know, I think it was the first orchestral piece that he'd ever written. And I think probably if you were to ask him, he would have said that whatever technique he had was really instinctive. He did have a sort of a handbook, a sort of orchestration handbook by his side. And you know, he would check things and make sure that, you know, he was not doing things that wouldn't work. But he was pretty relaxed, I think, just about the drive to do it was so strong that I think it overrode any doubts that he might have had. And certainly because they had such a big spotlight to do it under, you know, Albert Hall already booked and an orchestra, and eventually, you know, to such an important conductor, such an important musical figure as Malcolm Arnold to do it, really meant that, you know, we had no choice. So we just got stuck in and you know, didn't think about it so much. I think what was interesting was that when we got Marco's original sort of restoration, and we started to look at it and started to break it down, and John trying to remember, did I really write that? Or no, I would never have written that. And he would change something or reorchestrate something in the light of the experience that he had over the intervening 30 years. I mean, as a composer, he developed incredibly quickly. I mean, after he left Deep Purple, and I mean, I know this was an absolutely torturous decision for him. As is often the case with John, you know, he wore it lightly, and he tried to make light of it, but I know it was an enormous trauma for him. But he knew that he would never be able to develop or to do the things that he felt he needed to do as a composer when he was doing that round of, you know, hotel to airport to gig, back to the hotel, next city, you know. He knew he would never be able to do it if that was all he, you know, his life was going to be. So I think he paid a very high price, I think, both emotionally and obviously in economic terms, to be able to do that. And I've been making the new editions of all John's orchestral pieces, which we've been doing with various publishers, and it really shows the stature of what he did. And you know, when you play it with major orchestras, and they probably come into it with a certain skepticism because they think, well, you know, rock musician, isn't he? Isn't he just a keyboard player? What does he know about? And then wow, God, he really knew what he was doing. And this wonderful moment of recognition, which usually comes quite early in the rehearsal process of any piece by John, where the orchestra musicians realize that, you know, this is serious stuff, whether it's the concerto or whether it's any of his other orchestral pieces. So I think John would have blushed to compare himself with, you know, with any of the great composers, you know, but I think he was obviously continuously inspired by them and learnt from them. John bought orchestral scores all the time, and he would take them home and study them, and he would also go and talk to orchestral players, and he would ask a harp player, is it possible to do this, or should I do it like that, or have you got enough fingers to do that, you know, whatever it was that he would and people loved him and responded to him and were very happy to help him. And so he got this tremendous warmth and support always from orchestral musicians and from the people that he worked with. And so when I look back on, you know, when he died, and I went through all the music that he had on his computer, and I realized how hard he worked in those years, you know, composing, writing, studying, you know. It was a very big period of growth at a time when most people would be just putting their feet up, taking it easy, you know.
So, I mean, and that's that really speaks to John's his talent and how seriously he took it. And even when we first saw the concerto when we were younger, we could feel it as well. That this was a serious, well-written piece of music. But one of the things that Nate and I always joked about is when you see the original recording of it, and maybe you could speak to this if it happened later. It seemed like this was a really monumental combination of a rock band and an orchestra, which nobody had really seen before. And there were parts where the band would chime in, Ritchie would take a solo, and you could see some of the violin players or the orchestra players look like they were snickering or rolling their eyes like, oh boy, how did I get involved in this? Like they almost like they weren't taking it seriously. So have you ever experienced that further down the line when it kind of became a little more normalized to combine these two genres of music? Or
No, we never had those problems. I think that the differences between 1969 and 1999 were really completely revolutionary. You know, I mean, in 69, orchestras were predominantly almost 100% male, middle-aged, you know, and I suppose you have to remember as well, in 1969, Deep Purple weren't the legends that they later became. You know, so I suppose for an orchestra that's used to just churning out their Beethoven and their Brahms every week, suddenly to have to do something like that would have been a bit of a shock to some of them. And the story is, I don't know if I suppose it's true. John, is how John remembered it. They were all ushered in to meet the orchestra the week before the first rehearsal, and the orchestra was rehearsing Brahms' Fourth Symphony with a very distinguished elderly conductor, who classical fans will know, a conductor called Rudolf Kemper. And you know, if you knew that sort of how he was, that kind of conductor, you would know exactly how much of a shock it would have been for these long-haired, young, wildly dressed youths, you know, invading his rehearsal. But when they came in and the orchestra started kind of wolf whistling and catcalling and generally being, you know, disrespectful. And John said, you know, well, that was a very good indication of what we were in for. And I think the first rehearsal, I think they only had 2 rehearsals. And they had a lot to get through. And I don't think they really had a lot of time. I think it might have just been a question of playing it through and trying to solve any immediate disasters, but there wouldn't have been time to go into big detail. But I think even though the band was turned down really low, because in those days you couldn't amplify a symphony orchestra. So, you know, one guitar chord can obliterate the whole orchestra. They had to do something to make it work. And I think the band was turned so far down, it was almost acoustic. But even that for the orchestra was, you know, too much. And the stories are well known that you know, they put up various protests, you know, including ostentatiously reading newspapers, not paying attention. One woman got up and said she hadn't joined the Royal Philharmonic to play with a bunch of third-rate Beatles. And she stormed out and had to be brought back in again. And I think it was only Malcolm's enormous strength of character and determination, and the fact that he was prepared to stick his neck out for John. Really, he believed in John. I mean, I think he wasn't just doing it as a gig. I think he really believed in it and wanted to do it and wanted to give his best to it. And you know, he was prepared to court unpopularity with the orchestra and to get it done. And I think it's something that John never forgot. That you know, he always acknowledged that without Malcolm, without someone of that, you know, determination and will, the whole thing would have just fallen to bits. And you can see it on that film. You can see it on the old video. You know, despite, you know, whatever bad feeling they might have had about it, it has a fantastic atmosphere to it. You know, it has a wonderful, wild, kind of unpredictable, anything can happen kind of energy to it. And you know, and then but when we came to it, you know, the LSO came to this in 1999 with a completely different attitude. There's orchestras that is used to playing with rock bands, used to playing film scores, used to working with all kinds of musicians. And of course, they all brought their Deep Purple albums to sign, and they all, you know, went for autographs, and the whole percussion section went to find Ian, and, you know, they all got sticks and photos and stuff, just like a bunch of fans, really. It was a totally different thing. And so you know, and you see that on our film, you see that it has the similar energy, but a whole different kind of drive to it, a whole different motivation to it, you know, because of the different circumstances.
Did I read somewhere that there might have been one or two musicians that in the orchestra that played on both concertos?
Well, initially we thought so, and then there was an idea, because at that time, you know, Tristan Fry, the drummer. Do you remember that band Sky? Sort of late 70s, early 80s. He was the drummer in that band, and he was also a London session timpanist, percussionist, you know. And it was thought that he had been involved with it, but that turned out not to be the case. And there were one or two others, but no, I think once we actually went into it, we couldn't find anybody who'd done both. But I mean, if you look at the film, I think most of the players, you know, I would imagine would not have still been with us in 1999, or at least certainly not, you know, not unretired, you know, by then. It was quite an elderly orchestra, I think, on the old film.
Yeah, you never know, because sometimes you say that guy must be in his late 60s, and you're like, oh, he was 39.
I know. This happens. The older you get, this happens, doesn't it? I mean, there's some mysterious moment transpires sometime in your late 50s where you go from always dealing with people who are older than you to always dealing with people who are younger than you. And I'm afraid that's, you know, that's the point at which I find myself now. Yeah.
So one of the things we kind of joke about on the show from time to time is the fact that you mentioned the concerto being rewritten, but the fact that it was lost at all is mind-boggling nowadays. To how do you the idea that they may have brought the only score with them and just it was lost. Like, any theories about what could have possibly happened?
I mean, we tried so hard. I first met John. I think the very first time I met John would have been, I think it was after a show in Manchester, probably on the Abandoned tour, maybe the year before or 2 years before, something like that. And we talked about, you know, what might have happened to it, because he'd searched everywhere he could think of, you know, everywhere at home, and, you know, all the most obscure corners of his house, or, you know, nothing. And of course, in those days, photocopying was very, very expensive. And I think there were probably no more than 2 or 3 copies of the score in existence. I mean, we still have a similar situation with the Gemini suite. I'm still looking we're missing about 1/3 of the Gemini suite. And we don't know where that is either. But the bits that we've got of Gemini have got some markings on John's manuscript, actually directly onto the manuscript in Malcolm Arnold's hand. So this is what we suspect, is that Malcolm conducted it actually from the manuscript, not from a copy, and that John had a copy, and maybe there was one other one. And then probably after they did the Los Angeles performance, you know, in whenever that was, 1970, I can't remember the date, it probably all either got left behind in Los Angeles and somebody just thought, well, I'll just throw it out, or perhaps it came back to London. And then when the original Deep Purple office in London was closed, maybe they just thought, oh, it's just a pile of paper, and just threw it into a skip or something, you know. Somebody remembers there being a huge skip outside the office into which all sorts of stuff were thrown, you know, before they moved out. Because if it was anywhere to be found, we would have found it by now. You know, it's all this publicity around it, around the performances, around it being lost, and around us looking for it. Somebody would have come up with it by now if it was still anywhere to be found. So it probably just got thrown out.
Our conspiracy theory is that Ritchie stole it and has it in his basement. He didn't want to do it anymore.
Well, it's very strange how I mean, I used to think, how could you lose a whole concerto? You know, how can you not just lose the score, which is about 300 pages, you know, but all the parts, all the orchestra parts. And then I got to know John a bit, and then I thought, oh yeah, well, that's how you lose a concerto. You know, he was remarkably inattentive when it came to looking after his own stuff. You know, sort of, he was not a documenter. No, he was not the type to do that. And once I realized that, I started to be a bit more careful about taking care over the stuff that that I knew, you know, we would need for the future, for publishers and stuff like this. But we still haven't quite succeeded in protecting everything. As I say, I mean, if I really wanted to publish Gemini, and I know John started to reorchestrate it to make a new version of it, and I think he gave up just probably because he thought it was better to write new pieces than to, you know, think about old ones. But I retrieved probably about 2/3 of it, but the whole of the middle part, the vocal part, is still missing, and I have no idea where that is. So any ideas gratefully received from anybody.
If anyone's listening.
Anybody listening who knows where it might be.
I guess it's one of those things where when it's to us, it's like this sacred artifact, but when you're the person who created it, I guess it doesn't seem as sacred to you. It's just like, oh, it'll be around. I'll find it. I'll figure it out.
I think John probably thought, well, it served its purpose. You know, it was there for the moment. It made the recording, you know, and I think he probably thought, well, the band is not going to want to revisit it. You know, I probably didn't give it much thought. I think he was as surprised as anyone. I believe the original idea to redo the concerto came from Ian Gillan. And I think John was as surprised as anyone. And I must say, Ian's approach to this was wonderful. A lot of the best things that happened around that were Ian's ideas, Ian's thinking. I think he believed in it in a way that I think at the time in 69 he wasn't able to, and I think he more than made up for that in the way that he approached our one, and you know, all the ideas that we had about the running order of the concerts, how best to present it, you know, which context fitted it best, and what gave it the best chance with the audiences that were perhaps a bit more interested in rock and roll than in symphony orchestras. You know, all of that, a great deal of that came from Ian.
Would that include branching out and doing some of the solo work rather than just focusing on only the concerto?
Well, I think originally, I mean, you know, as you know, the Albert Hall, that was the idea that we would do in the first half things that represented each member of the band's other activities, you know, outside of Deep Purple. But I think for the tour, it became a little bit more complicated because people were coming expecting a Deep Purple set as well. And of course we had Ronnie with us, and Ronnie had to, you know, had his little set to do as well. And but you know, one of the nicest things, it's on they reissued recently the 2 concerts that we did in Japan, in Tokyo in 2001. And Ian sang Pictured Within. at those concerts, really beautifully, and that was that was a very nice thing to see. So yeah, there was a very nice sort of collaborative spirit around the whole thing.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. We had the opportunity to see Roger a couple of times, or a few times in John's case, recently, and he mentioned how they don't really pay much attention to their own solo work, let alone the solo work of the other people in the band. But it's pretty amazing that when it comes to it, they always seem to support each other on that solo work, and whether it's recording or performing live, and it's part of what makes that family so special.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I'm not so close to the band as a band, that as I used to be. I haven't yet met Simon, but I'm sure that the same culture is there as always was. There's I never laughed so much in my life as I did with particularly in Pace and John, a great double act. And all the years of John traveling with my Uncle Colin means that he used to be able to do a very good Geordie accent. The accent that my uncle has, from the northeast of England where I come from. It's quite a difficult accent to do if you don't come from there. Actors always say it's quite a hard one to do. And John could do that really well because he'd spent all those years around my uncle.
So a few one of our listeners and friends, who Newt Morton Johansson,
Oh yeah,
he says hi.
Oh, hello.
But he also he told us we have to ask you about a specific prank that Ritchie played on your uncle.
Yeah. This is the wash bag. Colin arrived. He got back from, I don't know, somewhere off the flight into the hotel room, dropped his bag, and went to the studio to check on everybody. And when he came back, he thought, "Gonna have a shower," and got into the suitcase. No wash bag. It was funny. What have I done with that? Oh, never mind. Did what he could. Went down to the bar. And there in the bar is Ritchie with his girlfriend discussing animatedly in some detail the length of the Mississippi River. And he's saying, "Oh, it must be at least, 60 miles long or something like that." And Colin's saying, "What are you talking about, man? Fucking, it's like 500 miles long, man." He said. And he's looking around the bar for something that he can use to prove to Ritchie that he's wrong about this. And on the wall, there's an old-fashioned kind of bookcase and a line of encyclopedias. And Colin goes, right. And he goes and he looks along the line, M for Mississippi, and he pulls out the book, and behind the book is his wash bag.
No, it's great. You never ran out of pranks.
Yeah, never a dull moment.
But that's the work of someone who knew my uncle very well, who knew he knew that he would do that. He knew that that's how he would. I mean, and that's very typical of Ritchie's sense of humor with these things. I mean, I've heard all sorts of stories that where it went too far, but yeah, I always like that story because I think so that shows how well Ritchie knew my uncle. Played, very, very well played.
Do you have any memorable experiences or stories like that involve your time with the band that you would want to share?
That you can legally share?
I think they were, I mean, what was remarkable really was how quickly they accepted me as part of them. And of course, I'm sure part of it was that they have a member of my family, working with them. But I don't think it was entirely that. I think there was some kind of connection evolved. And so everything that happened was very warm and very, there was never anything, there was never any sense of hostility or any kind of thing like that. I remember being taken by Ian Gillan to a strip joint in Hamburg. I think he was trying his best to embarrass me. And yeah, I can say he succeeded. Uh, and John went home that night. It was a night off in Hamburg. John went off and went home for 24 hours and came back. And he said, what? I leave the boy with you for 24 hours. This is what you do. But there were lots of things like that. And there were lots of really memorable evenings, where I got to spend time with each of them in different contexts. And also with Ronnie, who was just I'd met Ronnie when I was a kid, and I hadn't seen him, since then. And then he came along for this trip, and he, the story about the bees.
I was going to ask that. That was my next question.
Because Ronnie had a thing about he thought I looked like John Belushi, which in those days I did. Because I didn't have the beard and I was, kind of and so yeah, he was coming along with bees, and then I got the hat and I got the shades and I got, the whole kind of thing. And it culminated, I think it was in Madrid, where he rehearsed with the band Soul Man, from the movie. But it sort of course sang it to the words Paul Mann, he's a Paul. And I mean, who wouldn't give a limb or two to have Ronnie sing your name on stage? It was a wonderful memory, and of course he knew it would be a wonderful memory, and that's why he did it. He was he was a lovely. I mean, Ronnie was like all great people, had his complicated side, and I've heard, that he could be sometimes difficult with people. He never was with me. He was just kind and lovely, and I saw him not so long before he died, and one night I was sitting at home and I was listening to something with him in it, and I just suddenly got kind of overwhelmed by the feeling that, what a part of my life this man's voice had been. And he'd given me his phone number. So I thought, well, I'll just call him. He might be there. And Willie Fife answered the phone. And he said, yeah, Ronnie's here. And he put Ronnie on the phone. And I just got a chance to tell Ronnie how much I loved him. And I'm really glad I did that, because, there wasn't much time left. So that was a very important part of this project as well, was Ronnie's involvement.
And that was certainly big for us. We're very big fans of his, and particularly his work on the Butterfly Ball is a very special album to us personally. I think that's one of the things that kicked myself the most about is that they had performed songs from the Butterfly Ball on this concert, and for 25 pounds that we could have gone to.
That I heard great things about that too.
So you did talk about briefly, but you've done so much work in prolonging and celebrating John Lord's legacy, and most recently I noticed your publication of his post Deep Purple orchestral works. Can you talk about that project a little bit?
Yes, he had a publishing deal with one of the major classical publishers for his classical pieces. So the 5 big post Deep Purple works, which are the piano concerto, Boom with the Tinkling Strings, it's called, a piece called To Notice Such Things, which is for flute and string orchestra, and a piece for string orchestra called Disguises, and the big orchestral Durham concerto, and the big choral piece, which is called From Darkness to Light. And all of these pieces needed to be, the scores needed to be tidied up and make sure that there were no mistakes and that they reflected his, his last wishes. Particularly with the choral piece, he was not well enough to work on it himself, and so he left we had a long conversation about it where I came away with a big list of stuff that had to be changed or adjusted, or so we did all that, and then of course we have to create all the orchestral parts. And for things like the piano concerto, you have to make a score for the pianist to read. The pianist doesn't read from the orchestral score; he has his own reduction score and things like this. So it's a lot of editorial stuff, and it happened bit by bit over the years since John died, and finally got the last piece in place quite recently, and those are all out now, and people can buy them and hopefully perform them. And it's very important for me that John's music has a life, a continuation. I think that was perhaps for him the most important thing, to know that the music would survive him. Not that he was doing it for that reason, but I think he would not have liked to think that that the music was not being played. So I'm doing everything I can to to help that along. And we've also created scores of all the other pieces, things like the album, the Beyond the Notes album. All the pieces on there, which he recorded, but without really preserving them in any way. I think they were done pretty much on the hoof in the studio. He would say, "Oh, you play that, you play that," and he scribbled something out for someone. So the scores didn't really exist. So I had to work to transcribe those, or to try to restore them in some way, so that all of those exist. And we made a songbook, all with his songs, the songs he wrote with Sam Brown, and with Miller, and those kinds of things, and with Steve Balsamo, and so little by little we've been building that up, so that the music is out there for people to read, or to just to have, or for musicians to perform.
Well, thank you so much for
Yeah,
doing
that's
that.
wonderful.
That's incredible that
Yeah.
your dedication to that project.
Well, it was in a way, it's a very good way to keep him alive. When I'm doing all that, as I feel him standing there looking over at the computer screen, so I'm just checking, you're not doing anything, and I feel very much that he's there, making sure that I'm doing what he would have wanted me to do, and what he would have wanted the music to be. And so that's a very good way for me to keep him alive, because I feel like he's right there, when I'm doing all this stuff, and when I'm playing the music, it's the same. It's a very nice feeling that he's still around in some way.
That's great. Our listeners, on a completely different note, also want to know more about your cat, as you post a lot about your cat.
Well, we tried naming the cat after Rich Shaler, but actually we couldn't do that because it's a girl. So my cat is called Katya, because she's cattier than other cats. That is a very John-like pun, which I'm afraid I couldn't resist. No, for me, life is not complete without a cat. They're good for the soul, and they make, and somehow I think it's good for children, as well, to have another living thing in the house that you're responsible for, and that I think it's good makes you, well, for me anyway, makes me a better person, I think. And I do miss the cat when I miss my wife as well, of course, but I do.
In that order, right?
Yeah, so that's pretty much all I've got to say about that, really. I mean, I don't know. It's something that I've always felt the need for, and this cat particularly is very good because she doesn't. I've never had a thoroughbred cat before. I always had a moggy cat, you know, made up of whatever it was that came in off the street. You know, this is a posh cat. This is a proper cat that, you know, thoroughbred cat, you know, and totally different kind of personality. Anyway, I think that's enough about the cat.
Rich might disagree, but
Yeah, well, he emailed me this morning and told me I had to drop his name in this interview. So
oh,
Of course he did.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much for your time. It's amazing hearing these stories. We would love to chat with you again. And I think
anytime you like.
this will be just a great, yeah, I'm definitely certainly reach out to you for questions as we have them, and just appreciate everything that you, oh no.
Well, thank you. I mean, it was a wonderful thing to be able to do. It was a, you know, I remember at some point in the tour, I lost a bit of, somehow, I don't know, maybe we were getting tired, or maybe I was thinking, should I really be doing this for so long? You know, shouldn't I get back to my, you know, to my other stuff? And it was Ian Gillan who said, he said, yeah, but you know, when you get back into what you normally do, you're going to have an experience that no one else has got. And he was really right about that. You know, what I learned from them about their musicianship, about what it takes to make music, to make their music, to make the music the way they make music, left me with things that I use every day. You know, an understanding of ways. I mean, I think one of the ways in which you can learn things best is in terms of something else. You know, as you learn about one thing in terms of another discipline. And I learned, you know, huge amount from Ian Paice, for example, you know, about swing, about what the nature of a beat that swings. You know, Ian Paice is a big band drummer in disguise, really, I think. He's one of the greatest rock drummers of all time. But I think that's where his soul is in the you know, that kind of, there's a swing about Ian's drumming which is, you know, fantastic. And if you watch what he does and listen to what he does and learn from it, you can apply it in all sorts of other ways. You know, and to work with music, I mean, Steve Morse was just is just an extraordinary musician, someone who's, you know, there's no gap between the brain and the fingers. His fingers will do whatever he wants them to. And you know, someone kind of born with the instrument in their hands. And Roger, I you know, worked a lot more recently with Roger than with any of the others, because Roger was on the concerto that we did in Hungary a couple of years ago. You know, that's another kind of all-round musician. And what you learn is that all the great musicians, I think, tend to be great human beings too. Yeah, I think it goes together, you know. I mean, and that was what John was. People talk about John, they talk about the sort of gentlemanly qualities of John. I don't know about that. I'm sure it's true, but to me, above all, with John was kind. I mean, he was someone who thought about how to respond to things, and if he had a choice, he would do the kind thing. And he would try to say kind things about people if he could. And he would try to treat people kindly. And I think that's why he's remembered so, you know, so warmly by so many people. That they lost a friend, even if they didn't know him. You know, I think that was the sort of response that he inspired in people. So I consider myself very fortunate that I really could call him a friend. He was in some ways the best friend I ever had. and I miss him continuously. But the privilege that I have to try to keep his music alive and to have this role in, you know, in keeping it alive, is really an absolute treasure in my life.
That's great. And really, thank you again for doing it.
Yeah.
And thank you for being a part of our show. We really
You're
appreciate
very
it.
welcome. I look
Yes.
forward to hearing the whole result, and let me know when it goes out.
Yeah. So if you want to listen to our silliness as we discuss the
Oh, of course. Yeah.
discuss the music, if you can
Especially that.
tolerate people who don't know anything about who are extremely minor musicians, speak to things on the level
Yeah.
you can. But
But you know, enthusiasm is a great thing. And Purple has, you know, they have the greatest fans. As I say, I've met a lot of people, you know, that I really am happy that, you know, I still I'm still in touch with. And that's you know, that's a really great thing. And Colin, you know, Colin's still he's still going strong, you know, he seems in good form at the moment.
and he posts some absolutely amazing pictures that he'll just dig up. Oh, here's a picture from 1985 on tour, and that no one's ever seen before, and he'll post
Yeah.
it, and it's just like, this is
Yeah,
incredible. What a great service that is.
he's got a lot of stuff. I tried to get him to write, because you know he wrote the sort of book,
Sure.
a sort of autobiography book. I think he should do a photo book, you know, with all these
Absolutely.
stuff. And I've been trying to get him to do that for years. So I don't think he's really, I don't think he really wants to do that. But it would be great, because you know I see all this stuff on Facebook every week, and you think, well, you know, there's an audience for this stuff. People would buy that, I'm sure.
Oh, sure. I mean, a photo, one of his photos, and a 200, 300 word little story about it below, that would be a fantastic book.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. Try and talk him into it. You should get him on if you'll come on to do it. You know, he's probably got stories that no one else has got.
Yeah, we've been saying that for years. We should forward with that.
You know, he's the funny thing about Colin is that I think, you know, he keeps it very close to his chest. And he doesn't show off about it and doesn't kind of mouth off about it. But if you get him talking, you know, there are things that he can tell you that, you know, no one else can. So, you know, I suppose while you still can, there might be, you know, I don't know if he's interested in doing that kind of thing or not, but he'd be great. And of course, I owe him this whole thing. If Colin hadn't said on the bus, well, my nephew's a conductor, would never have happened. They'd have got someone else, you know, and all this would have just been, you know, I would never have met John. I would never have done any of this. It's all down to him.
And it wouldn't have been as special to get someone that didn't have that connection with the music already.
Yeah, I think that was, you know, that was a bit of luck. But you know, if Colin hadn't said that, shameless nepotism, you know, you know, it wouldn't have happened. And as Ian said, you know, I wouldn't have had that unique experience.
Well, a very little bit of luck, but a lot of deserved, based on your skill. Because if I had been his nephew, and they listed that, it wouldn't have gone very far past that.
Well, it's like a lot of things in life. You do, you know, a bit of luck to help you along, and then try to make the most of the chances that it gives you. I think we did that. I'm hoping to see Purple. I haven't seen them for years as a band. I've seen individuals, you know, occasionally, but they're coming to the UK, I think, towards the end of the year, aren't they? In a couple of months' time.
Yes, I know they're organizing a few meetups. One big one seems to be a lot of people going to see them in Leeds. So that might be the show to be at.
I might try to do that, because I don't know how many more chances I'm going to get.
I think you'll be very happy with how well they're getting on with Simon.
Yeah, we would highly recommend.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard that from everybody. And I haven't met him. Of course, I heard him. The new album is, I think, fantastic, and particularly, I mean, I like these last four albums, you know, the Bob Ezrin albums very much. But this one particularly, I think the both musically and lyrically, I think Ian hit a seam of of lyrical genius in this album that's quite special, I think, even by his standards.
Absolutely.
Right, definitely.
So I like it very much, and so I'm hoping if I can get along and see that. I mean, although you know, look, they're giving every sign of being intending to go on forever. Presumably, there is a finite limit on it, and so maybe I should go while I can.
I can't believe they're starting on a new album in a couple months.
Yeah, yeah,
I've been thinking it was their last album for 10 years and it just keeps going. It's
yeah,
great.
Right.
yeah. No, I love to. It's great because every time it seems to be fresh. Every time there seem to be new ideas, and you know, I mean, Don. We've talked a lot about John, but actually, um, Don was an earlier influence on me. I met Don long before I met John, because Don was in Rainbow. You know, when I got that chance to go and see them, and as I say, Colin had somehow persuaded Don to let me play the keyboards. So let me play Don's keyboards. Um, and I was admiring Don's playing and loving Don's playing really earlier than I got to know John's. And and every new Purple album, it's Don's playing that excites me especially. I think even the playing, even the solos that he did on the Turning to Crime album, you know, on all those covers, and this little bit of Chopin, you know, watching the river flow, and then you get a bit of the Chopin second scherzo at the end. Maybe people don't realize that's what he's playing. He's playing a bit of Chopin that he studied as a child on the piano at the end of that track. And and the Bach quotations, nothing at all. You know, that song which has got an extended bit of Bach in it, and Bach even gets a you know, a sort of a thank you on the sleeve notes. Yeah, Don's a special musician, I think, and you know, I do some people seem to think that it's either Don or John. You have a favorite one or the other, but for me, both, you know, both play a part in my musical influences, and I'd have liked to been both of them really.
Yeah, we celebrate all
Yeah.
the members, and I think the last few shows that I saw with, or that we saw with Steve, Don was always the one I was looking at, and the one that was
Yeah.
kind of stealing the show. And I
Yeah.
think, I don't know what John thinks, but in the seeing them a few times recently, I was like, okay, I think Simon is kind of stealing the show now, and
Oh yeah.
it's really great to see um that they can still have that level of excitement.
I think there's something very healthy about what I've seen about, you know, I've not seen them in the flesh, but I've seen a lot of stuff online and, you know, things like this. And what seems to be really healthy is they seem to be in a very healthy state of competition among themselves. You know, okay, you do that solo, I'll do this one, you know, and I'm going to do that one. And then, you know, the interaction between the keyboards and the guitar, which of course is crucial. And that was what John did so beautifully with both with Ritchie and with Steve. Don is also did it beautifully with Steve, and now, you know, with Simon, it's so alive, you know. And I mean, it's one of the things, you know, talking about the difference between rock music and classical music. You know, we tend not to improvise, classical musicians. You know, we play what's on the page, and that's a kind of historical anomaly. It used to be the case that composer performers, you know, did both things. You know, Bach did, Mozart did, you know, Beethoven. All of those composers were great improvisers as well as composers. And somehow history separated those two things to the extent now that you're either one or the other. And so, I remember the orchestra that, did the tour with us, and they were always amazed that every night it was different. Every night something different would happen. Some would take off in a certain direction, or John would do something, or Steve would do something, or someone would do something, or Ian would just have a little moment of genius in the drum solo, or the other Ian would just do an elaboration of an improvisatory sort of thing that made everybody intake of breath. That's something that classical musicians, if they are switched onto it, really love, because we don't do that. We're not so good at that anymore. And so when you get to work with people on that really top level of improvisational sort of genius, and of the willingness to take a risk, I don't know where this is going, but I'm going to go with it anyway. That's a fantastic thing, and that's really alive in the band. And I suspect that's one of the things that's keeping them going. Is it's obviously a joyful thing for them to do.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, Paul, thank you so much for joining us. This
It's a
was
pleasure.
an absolute pleasure, as all of ours, and we really appreciate your time.
I'm really glad to have had a chance to do it, and really nice to meet you. And yeah, good luck. I'd like to see what what you put together on this.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Before you go, would you mind doing a quick little promo for us?
Sure.
Just like, this is Paul Mann, you're listening to the Deep Purple podcast, something like that.
Yeah, sure. This is Paul Mann. You're listening to the Deep Purple podcast.
Whew, one take. We didn't.
Perfect.
Very good.
We usually don't get one take.
You
That's
need
great.
another one?
No,
that
that's perfect.
That's okay. Very good.
Thank you so much. Right. Yeah, we'll be in touch, and yeah, if we have any questions, I'll reach out to you. But this has just been a great way to start the day.
Very good.
Absolutely.
Well, have a splendid day, and it's almost time for a glass of wine here.
Yes, enjoy.
Yes,
Thanks
awesome.
a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Take
Thanks,
care.
Paul.
Bye.
Bye.
All right. Well, wow, that was an awesome time talking to Paul. Yeah, just some great stories, and what a generous guy, generous with his time, super nice guy.
Yeah, really, he just really took over and went off in all sorts of directions. Like, even we were like, okay, it's time to, yeah, we're going to wrap up now. And he just launched into like 4 more stories, and it was great. I mean, things we weren't even expecting. He talked about Ronnie, his cat, Rich.
Well, that was Rich. That was unexpected.
Yeah, but
yeah, it's great,
yeah.
because like, as he's talking, I'm like, well, let's cross off that question. I'll cross off that question.
Yeah, I mean, I was really, yeah, I
Great.
was kind of looking at he just kind of touched on everything that was on the lists, just kind of naturally. And I guess I was kind of expecting, usually when you talk to somebody, you ask them about themselves and their experiences, but really it was more, really just a love letter to John Lord. There was just so much about John Lord in this, which I found just really wonderful, because we talk about him a lot, and but really just to talk about him in depth, like not just at this point it's remembering him and all that, but I mean, this was really in depth stories about him, and him as a composer, and just really a lot of great remembrances about John Lord in this episode.
I always get a little self-conscious, and I want to say, well, I should probably start wrapping it up, because here we are, we're talking to a big time conductor traveling the world and doing all this stuff, and we're just a couple of schlubs with a podcast. But he wanted to talk, which is awesome. And one of the things that really hit me was when he talked about how nice everybody is, and I didn't say it during the interview, but it's just like that expression, "Don't meet your heroes." I don't, from my experience, I don't agree with it because
Unless they're
everybody ever
involved in Deep Purple.
yeah, exactly. If they're involved in Deep Purple, meet them because they'll be so nice,
Yeah.
so appreciative. And he talked about the fans as well, and the fans are the same. A
No,
lot of fans for
yeah.
other bands, it's a pissing contest, or they look down on you. And it's just every fan we meet, every person involved with the band, the members of the band themselves are always so generous and giving and kind and nice. And we're very lucky.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, when everybody just refers to the Deep Purple family tree, and he was talking about everybody from the band to Dio, to fans. It's all true. It's stuff that we've experienced, especially since we've started the show and we've gone to shows together. Is that we've had the same kind of experiences, and to hear that from people involved with the band over the years, it's just we feel you really know that it's true, that it's an experience that everybody's having, and it's just really, as you said, it's nice to know that what a great community that we've really become a part of.
Yep, 100%. It does feel like a family. And whether it's talking to other fans who you just met, who know a lot more than you, who've been fans for longer, it doesn't matter. It's always that feeling. And whether it's that or going to a show and having Roger Glover take time out of his day to say, "Oh, do you need a drink? Do you I'll go get you a drink." It's like, whoa, no. It's like
Yeah.
going to visit a family member's house. Yeah, they'll go get me a drink, but you're Roger Glover. No, don't do that.
Mm,
It's just incredible. So
yeah,
we continue to be blessed, my friend.
yeah, and also to know that we're contributing to that as well. I mean, like you said, we're just two schlubs who are fans and been doing this for 5.5 years almost,
Yeah, wow.
right?
We're just
And
having the same conversations we always had, just recording them now.
yeah.
The last 5 years, we're actually recording them.
But yeah, it's great to just kind of look at our when you look at our patrons, followers on Facebook, the number of people that we've interacted with and that we're engaging. It's nice to know that we're part of furthering that community, and maybe even like we've developed our own the people that we've met and that we continue to meet. So it's just it's really been just a great place to be, and to keep expanding on it.
Absolutely. And we will continue to expand upon it in our next episode, whenever that is. I don't know when this is going to fall in the scope of things. We'll put it in line with our coverage of the 1999 concerto for the 25th anniversary. And yeah, we'll see you next episode.
Thank you for listening to the Deep Purple podcast. If you like what you hear and would like more episodes in the future, please donate on Patreon to support the show. You can also leave us a review in Apple Podcasts to help new people discover the show. You can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for show updates. See deeppurplepodcast.com for more details. Thank you for listening.